So vampire literature has been around since the 18th century. Now the movies are earning $3 billion. It's just a phenomenal genre, romantic literature, as you would call it. Why are we so attracted to blood-sucking, non-dead characters?
Well, that's a good question. I've always thought the vampire was a powerful metaphor for the outsider in each of us, the predator in each of us, the outcast. I think there's a time in your life, in everybody's life, where a person confronts that he or she feels so different from other people, so alone, so alienated. The vampire is a perfect metaphor for all that. He looks like us, talks like us, and yet he's immortal. He's the undead, as you said. And he has to kill to live, and in a way we're all killing to live all the time.
Okay, you're just going to jump right in it because there's a lot of our viewers would be surprised we're talking about vampires and how your books are so full of philosophical questions, really. And I found a deliberate allegory to Christianity as I read this book, now Prince Lestat. You were adamant at one point that you weren't going to return to vampire fiction.
Right, I thought I was finished with it, yeah.
Yeah, tell us why you thought you were finished with it.
Well, I associated it with the dark, depressing periods of my life, with grief and loss, and I felt I had explored my nihilism and my atheism and my grief for my lost Catholic faith. I thought all that was bound up with the vampires for me. And I had returned to the church, returned to being a believer, and I just didn't think that I would go back to the vampires. But then years passed, quite a few years, and I went through many different emotional changes, and my spiritual journey has continued. And I found that I missed my vampire hero, Prince Lestat. I wanted to bring him back, and I wanted to talk through him and with him and about him in a new way.
I want to go back just a couple of steps on the many stages of grief and the different things you went through.
Yeah.
You know, and the most common and most painful experience for people is when we lose our family. So you've gone through what it is to be a widow. You lost Michelle when she was only 5. How has such profound grief affected you and shaped your imagination?
Well, I think grief has shaped everything I've ever written, really. It's shaped the tone of all my books, the subject matter, the style. I grew up in a very old-fashioned Catholic city, New Orleans, in a Catholic family, in a Catholic ghetto. I lost my mother when I was 14. That was a tragic loss. She was a wonderful, vibrant person. And then I lost my daughter early on. And then ultimately I lost my husband, Stan. He suffered a brain tumor, and after 41 years of marriage, he died within about 4.5 months. In one way or another, I've been writing about all this ever since I started out. And I understand that's what we do as writers. We spin the straw of life into gold in what we write, or we try to.
So now in coming back to the vampire theme, Prince Lestat, is he the character? You said you wanted to write a book with a redemptive framework where Lestat wrestles with the existence of God in a personal way. Have you done that?
Lestat's always wrestling with the question of God. He always is. And he's always wrestling with how can he live a meaningful life when the world sees him as a monster. He's a vampire. He's supposed to be an abomination. But he rebels against that because he didn't choose to be a vampire. And he doesn't know how to be good at being a vampire if this is something other people think is so awful. So he's always wrestling with these questions. How is he going to live his life? One of the Vampire Chronicles, one of the more popular ones that I wrote, is Memnoch the Devil, in which he's visited by a spirit who claims to be the Christian devil and gives him his version of how he's trying to save humanity. And that was all about these questions.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to ask. Is my religious imagination just so active that I saw the allegory to the Christian story? I saw God trying to redeem Lestat, trying to reach into the world here. You weren't looking for any of those themes.
No, but I believe firmly that if you dig into your soul and you tell everything you know in a novel, allegories will be there. You don't have to plan them. You know, they will be there. It depends on how deep you're willing to go. You know, I take fiction very, very seriously. I don't just write for entertainment. You know, I'm writing everything I know in these books. I'm using the vampires as my way of talking about everything that's important to me. So I'm not surprised at the allegories people find in there. They're meant to be there, but they're meant by the subconscious.
Let's talk about completely the opposite of the vampire characters. Your Christ the Lord out of Egypt
Right.
and Road to Cana stories.
Right.
Tell me about writing about the life of Jesus as a boy.
Oh, that was the greatest challenge I ever faced as a writer. And those two books, Christ the Lord out of Egypt, Christ the Lord, The Road to Cana, gave me the greatest joy I've ever had as a writer. Those were the only novels in which I ever attempted to reference something outside of my own alternate reality. I wanted those books to be absolutely biblically correct from start to finish. I didn't want to water down Jesus in any way for a modern audience.
And you also say these are the best, you said at the time these were the best book you had ever written, Road to Cana.
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think the best writing I've ever done, but there are a lot of my readers who just, for various reasons, they're not going to go there. You know, they are as biased against those books as some of my Christian readers are against books about vampires. Then there are some readers who read it all, and they give you very wonderful responses to all of it. But those books, I was determined to do that and yet make Jesus a real living, breathing character in Nazareth on a hot day, you know, for the reader, regardless of whether the reader believed in God or believed in Jesus or believed passionately in Jesus. I wanted to make him real. I wanted to make it a real journey with Christ.
Why? Why was it so important?
I felt that I was in love with the Lord. I was in love with his story. The incarnation is the greatest love story I've ever heard. God comes down, is born with us, grows up with us, works with us, and then dies as we die, and then comes back to show us that we have immortal souls. And I thought, I want to go and imagine the backstory for Jesus, the biblically correct story, but the story of little events that are not in the Bible. Like, what's it like to live in a village where people know your mother supposedly was visited by an angel? What's it like where they're gossiping about the fact that, you know, at your birth, angels sang to shepherds? And Jesus has to deal with that every day. People saying, well, what's so special about you? What was all that about? When are you going to do something here? You know.
And so you had no problem going from the fiction world of vampires to the historical facts that Jesus lived, had angels at his birth. Those things.
No. Well, I grew up Catholic, and spirituality is as real to me as materialism is to anybody else. I mean, we grew up talking around the table about how God loved us and that this was God's world.